The lipstick smudge on her collar wasn't mine. I noticed it the second Kayla walked through the door, dropping her purse by the front entrance like she hadn't just come home 3 hours late. "Where were you?" I asked, keeping my voice even. Kayla barely glanced at me, kicking off her heels like it was just another Tuesday night. "Work ran late. I told you." I stared at the red mark, bright, glaring against the pale blue of her blouse. "Right," I muttered. "Work." She didn't notice the sarcasm. Kayla poured herself a glass of wine and settled onto the couch, scrolling through her phone with that little half-smile I hadn't seen directed at me in months. I sat across from her, watching, studying the way her fingers danced across the screen. Quick, confident. She wasn't texting about work. I bet my life on it. The tension in the room thickened, but she didn't look up. Not even when I said her name again. "Kayla." "What?" she snapped, finally glancing up. I nodded at her collar. "You might want to check your shirt." Her eyes flicked down. For a brief second, I saw the panic flash across her face. But she hid it quickly, brushing at the stain like it was nothing. A lipstick. Must have been from Sophia at work. We hugged goodbye. A lie. Smooth as silk. I didn't say anything. Just let the silence stretch out between us. She shifted uncomfortably. "Seriously, Mark? Don't start. I'm too tired for this." I nodded slowly, rising from my seat. "Yeah, I bet you are." As I headed upstairs, I heard her mutter something under her breath. Something about how I was paranoid. But I wasn't paranoid. I was done. The next morning, I watched Kayla leave for work like usual. She kissed me on the cheek, tossed a fake "love you" over her shoulder, and drove off without a second glance. The second her car disappeared down the street, I got to work. I started with her closet. It didn't take long to find the second phone, tucked neatly inside one of her shoeboxes. Locked, of course. But Kayla wasn't as clever as she thought. Her password was the same as the one she used for Netflix. The messages were all there. Pages and pages of them. "Last night was amazing. Can't wait to see you again. I'll tell Mark I'm working late. Same hotel." I clenched the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. She even sent pictures, somewhere between rage and disbelief. I found myself scrolling through them, each one cutting deeper than the last. Kayla in lingerie I'd never seen before. Kayla kissing some guy in a hotel room I didn't recognize. Kayla laughing in bed, sheets tangled around her legs. I didn't know whether to scream or laugh. Instead, I set the phone down carefully, took a deep breath, and started planning. I wasn't going to confront her. Not yet. I wanted to make sure she felt this. Friday night, I packed an overnight bag for the kids and dropped them off at my sister's place. Kayla thought they were at a friend's house for a sleepover. She didn't question it. She had other plans. I followed her car downtown, keeping a safe distance as she pulled into the parking garage of the Regal Hotel. Room 302. I watched from the bar across the street as she stepped into the elevator with him. Tall, dark hair, the kind of smug asshole you could spot from a mile away. By the time they were upstairs, I was already sending the photos from her secret phone to her work email. I made sure to include the HR department. Kayla had always said honesty was important at work. I figured I was just helping her stick to her values. When Kayla came home the next morning, I was already sitting in the kitchen, sipping coffee like nothing had happened. She walked in, humming softly, hair still damp from the hotel shower. "Morning," she chirped. I didn't look up. "How was work?" Kayla froze mid-step. "Fine," she said carefully. "Late night." I finally met her gaze, locking eyes with her across the table. "I'm sure it was." Her smile faltered. "And that was just the beginning. Before you know what Mark did, let us know what would you do in Mark's place? Let us know in the comments." Kayla's hand hovered over the coffee pot, her grip tightening slightly. She could feel it, something was off. I watched the gears turning in her head, that nervous flicker in her eyes she tried so hard to hide. She poured coffee, but her hand trembled just enough to spill a few drops. "Why are you looking at me like that?" she asked, forcing a smile. I didn't answer, just sipped my coffee slowly, letting her sweat. She shifted on her feet, trying to play it cool. "Look, I know I've been working late a lot. You don't have to get weird about it." I set my mug down softly, the sound echoing louder than it should have in the quiet kitchen. "I'm not being weird," I replied. But I think we should talk about your work trips. Kayla stiffened, the smile disappearing in an instant. What about them? I pulled out her second phone and set it on the table between us. Her face drained of color. Lose something? I asked, leaning back in my chair. She stared at the phone like it was a live grenade. Where did you get that? You left it behind. In your closet. Not very careful, are you? Kayla's eyes darted to the door like she was ready to bolt. Mark, I can explain. Can you? I cut her off, keeping my voice calm but firm. Because from where I'm sitting, the pictures and text do a pretty good job explaining everything. She swallowed hard, but I didn't give her room to breathe. Room 302 at the Regal? I pressed, watching the panic bloom across her face. Classy choice. Kayla's fingers tightened around the back of the chair in front of her. You snooped through my stuff? She snapped, her voice rising defensively. That's insane, Mark. Do you know how invasive that is? I laughed. A bitter, humorless sound. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I invade your privacy while you were busy screwing some guy in a hotel room? Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She was cornered, and she knew it. I don't want to hear it, Kayla, I said, cutting her off before she could launch into whatever half-baked excuse she was about to throw at me. I've seen enough, and so has your boss. Her eyes widened in horror. What did you do? I smiled, cold and sharp. Let's just say your inbox is going to be very interesting on Monday. Kayla's face twisted in panic. Mark, no. You can't. Oh, I already did. She stepped forward, reaching for the phone, but I snatched it away. You think I'm just going to sit here while you parade around behind my back? I growled, finally letting the anger bleed through. I gave you everything, Kayla, and this is how you pay me back. Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't care. Please, she whispered, her voice cracking. Don't ruin my job. I'll stop. I swear. I shook my head slowly. You're not sorry, Kayla. You're just sorry you got caught. She stood there, frozen, while I calmly got up from the table and walked out of the kitchen. I wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. That afternoon, I packed the rest of her things into boxes. Every piece of clothing, every framed photo of us that used to sit on the mantel, every reminder that she'd ever lived in this house. By the time she came back downstairs, the boxes were lined up by the front door. Her eyes flicked to them immediately, lips parting in disbelief. What is this? She asked, her voice shaky. You're leaving, I said simply, not bothering to look at her. Mark, no. I live here, she stammered, taking a step toward the boxes. Not anymore. She stared at me like she didn't recognize the man standing in front of her. I'll go stay with my sister for a while, she muttered, snatching her keys from the hook by the door. We can talk about this later. No, we won't, I said, grabbing her arm before she could leave. She flinched, eyes darting up to mine. You're not coming back, Kayla, I said, tightening my grip just enough to make sure she understood. We're done. She yanked her arm away, tears streaking her face. This is insane, she hissed, shoving past me. You're overreacting. I didn't say anything as she stormed out, slamming the door behind her. I locked it, and for the first time in months, the house felt lighter. I wasn't naive enough to think that would be the end of it. Kayla wasn't the type to go down quietly. Sure enough, the text started pouring in the second she was gone. Mark, let's talk about this. Don't make this worse than it is. You're being petty. I didn't respond to a single one. By Sunday night, she stopped texting. She must have thought I was cooling off. She had no idea. The final nail was coming. Monday morning, I sat in my car just down the street from Kayla's office. I wasn't there to talk. I just wanted to watch the fallout unfold in real time. At exactly 8:37 a.m., Kayla pulled into the parking lot. She stepped out of her car in a sharp gray blazer, looking every bit the polished professional she pretended to be. But I could see it, the way her eyes darted nervously around, the tension in her shoulders. She knew something was coming. I waited. By 9:15 a.m., I saw it. Her boss, Michael Simmons, walked out of the building, stiff and serious. He scanned the parking lot, pausing when he spotted Kayla's car. He was holding a thick manila folder. A few minutes later, Kayla appeared in the doorway. Even from this distance, I could see the panic on her face as Michael pulled her aside. The conversation was brief. Her expression twisted into something ugly, anger, shock, maybe even disbelief. She gestured wildly, but Michael just shook his head and handed her the folder. Kayla opened it, flipping through the pages. The photos, the texts, all of it. Her hands trembled as she held the folder closer to her chest. I leaned back in my seat, watching as she stormed back into the building, no doubt headed for HR. It wouldn't help her. I made sure the evidence was airtight. By noon, she walked out again. Alone. No folder. No blizzard. Just a small box tucked under her arm. Fired. I smiled as I watched her march to her car, slamming the door so hard the whole vehicle rocked. She sat there for a while, staring straight ahead, gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. I knew exactly how she felt. That evening, Kayla showed up at the house. I saw her car pull into the driveway through the kitchen window. I let her knock 3 times before I opened the door, leaning casually against the frame. She didn't waste time. "What the fuck is wrong with you, Mark?" she snapped, pushing past me into the house. I let her. She spun around, eyes blazing. "You got me fired." I shrugged. "You got yourself fired." Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She paced the living room like a trapped animal, running her hands through her hair. "You didn't have to do this," she muttered, more to herself than me. "You could have just told me to stop. We could have worked this out." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "I told you to stop, Kayla. Months ago. You didn't listen." She finally met my gaze, and for the first time I saw it. She wasn't angry. She was scared. "Mark, please," she whispered, her voice trembling now. "I messed up. I know that. But this is too much. You ruined everything." I crossed my arms. "Good." Her eyes welled with tears, but I didn't care. "You deserve worse," I added coldly. "But I'll settle for this." She wiped at her face angrily, trying to hold it together. "Where am I supposed to go?" she asked, her voice cracking. "I lost my job. I can't afford rent." "Not my problem," I interrupted, cutting her off. "You should have thought about that before you decided to crawl into bed with someone else." Kayla stared at me, searching my face for some kind of softness, something she could exploit. But there was nothing left for her to take. "I'll pick up the rest of my stuff tomorrow," she said quietly, her voice flat now. "Good," I replied, stepping back to the door. "I'll leave the boxes on the porch." She didn't say goodbye. She just walked out, shoulders slumped in defeat. I watched her go, waiting until her car disappeared around the corner before I shut the door and locked it behind her. Over the next few days, Kayla kept her distance. She sent a few half-hearted texts asking to talk, but I ignored them. When she came by to pick up her things, I left the boxes outside, just like I promised. I didn't even open the door. By the end of the week, she was gone. A few weeks later, I heard through a mutual friend that Kayla had moved in with her sister across town. She was bartending at some dive bar, far from the corner office she used to occupy. Apparently, Greg, the guy she cheated with, wasn't interested in playing house with a woman who had nothing left to offer. I wasn't surprised. Kayla never texted me again. Not after I sent her one last photo. It was a picture of her packed boxes sitting on the curb, right beside the trash bins. Goodbye. 3 months passed. Kayla became nothing more than a ghost in my rearview mirror. The house was quieter without her constant bullshit filling the air, and honestly, I liked it that way. I got back into my routines. Work, gym, weekends with the kids. Simple, peaceful. Until I ran into Greg. I didn't plan it. I was at a hardware store picking up supplies when I spotted him 2 aisles over, browsing light fixtures like he wasn't the reason my marriage crumbled. At first, I wasn't sure it was him. I'd only seen the guy through blurry hotel pictures and half-naked selfies Kayla thought she deleted. But I recognized that smug posture anywhere. He was talking to another woman, leaning way too close. Same shit he pulled with Kayla, no doubt. I stood there for a moment, just watching him. He didn't even know I existed. That pissed me off more than anything. I could have walked away. Should have probably. But the way he laughed, casual, carefree, made my blood boil. I walked straight over. "Greg." He froze, blinking like he'd just been caught shoplifting. The woman beside him glanced between us, clearly confused. "Do I know you?" Greg asked, narrowing his eyes. "You should," I said, stepping closer. "You fuck my wife." His eyes flickered with recognition. then widened as he took a half step back. Oh, Mark, right? He tried to play it cool, offering some bullshit apologetic smile. Look, man, I didn't know she was married. Kayla never mentioned you. I cut him off with a low chuckle. Save it. I don't care. Greg shifted nervously, tugging at the collar of his jacket. Look, I'm sorry, all right? If I'd known. Stop, I snapped. I don't want an apology. I just wanted to see the look on your face when you realized who I was. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. I'm not here to fight you, I continued, leaning in just enough to make him uncomfortable. I already won. Kayla lost her job, lost the house, lost everything, and last I heard, she's living with her sister working minimum wage. His eyes darted to the woman beside him, who looked more confused by the second. She didn't tell you? I smirked. Figures. Greg's mouth twisted into something halfway between regret and embarrassment. He shoved his hands into his pockets, avoiding eye contact. Guess that fantasy wasn't worth it, huh? I added, stepping back. Good luck with this one. I nodded toward the woman at his side. She glared at him, already piecing things together. I didn't wait to see how the rest played out. I left Greg standing there, sinking under the weight of his own decisions. Later that night, Kayla texted me. Kayla, Greg called me. What the fuck did you say to him? Me. Told him the truth. You two deserve each other. Kayla. Seriously, Mark? Let it go. Me, I did. He's the one who wanted to reminisce. She didn't reply. A week passed, and I thought that was the end of it, until I came home one evening and saw Kayla's car parked in the driveway. She was sitting on the porch, arms crossed, waiting. I didn't bother getting out immediately. I just sat there, watching her through the windshield, debating whether to drive off and let her freeze in the cold. Eventually, I killed the engine and stepped out. What do you want, Kayla? She stood, wrapping her coat tighter around herself. I just need to talk to you. I sighed. Haven't we done enough talking? Please, she said softly, her voice trembling. Just 5 minutes. I didn't invite her inside. Instead, I leaned against the hood of my car, arms crossed, and waited. Kayla stepped closer, but the nervous energy in her posture told me this wasn't just some random visit. I need help, she admitted, barely above a whisper. I blinked. Help? She nodded, staring at the ground like she couldn't bear to look at me. Greg's gone, she continued. Kicked me out? Said I brought too much drama into his life. I fought the urge to laugh. So let me guess, I said. You thought you'd come crawling back here? Kayla's lip quivered. Mark, I don't have anywhere else to go. That's not my problem. I have nothing, she snapped, tears welling up in her eyes. For a brief second, I felt a flicker of something, pity maybe, but it died just as quickly as it appeared. You threw away everything when you walked into that hotel room, I said coldly. You chose Greg over your family. Over me. Kayla wiped at her face, sniffling. I was stupid, Mark. I thought I could fix it. I thought. You thought wrong. I pushed off the car and stepped past her, unlocking the front door. When I looked over my shoulder, she was still standing there, shivering in the cold. I'm not letting you back in, Kayla, I said firmly. Go home to your sister. She opened her mouth to protest, but I didn't let her. This isn't your home anymore. I shut the door, locking it behind me. Kayla stood there for another minute, maybe 2, before finally walking back to her car. I watched through the window as she drove away. And this time, I knew she wasn't coming back. Days passed, and Kayla's absence was like a breath of fresh air. No more passive-aggressive texts, no more surprise visits. It felt like she finally understood whatever we had was gone, and there was no resurrecting it. Until I got the voicemail. It was late. I just finished brushing my teeth when my phone buzzed with a notification. I swiped it open and saw Kayla's name. I almost deleted it without listening, but something made me press play. Her voice trembled, barely audible over the static. Mark, I know I shouldn't be calling. A heavy pause followed, filled with shaky breathing. I'm sorry. For everything. I never thought it would end like this. I need help. I don't know what to do anymore. Please, just call me back. I stood in the bathroom, staring at my reflection in the mirror, Kayla's voice still echoing in my head. For the first time since this all started, I felt nothing but exhaustion. I didn't call her back. Instead, I blocked her number the next morning. It wasn't out of spite. I just didn't have the energy to keep playing her games. By the weekend, I'd almost forgotten about the voicemail. I spent Saturday working in the garage, fixing up the kids' bikes for summer. I was halfway through tightening the chain on Julie's bike when the doorbell rang. I wiped my hands on an old rag and walked to the front door, half expecting it to be a delivery. But when I opened it, I froze. Kayla's sister, Megan, stood on the porch, arms crossed and eyes burning with something between anger and desperation. "What the hell, Mark?" she snapped, shoving her phone in my face. I squinted at the screen. It was a text. From Kayla. "Tell Mark I'm sorry. Goodbye." My stomach twisted. I pushed the phone away and stepped outside. "What's this supposed to mean?" Megan's eyes narrowed. "I was hoping you'd know. She's been acting weird for weeks. Barely leaves the house. Drinks too much. And now this? I thought you want to know before she does something stupid." I sighed, pinching the bridge of my nose. "Look, Megan, I get that you're worried, but I can't keep bailing her out. She made her choices. I've done enough." Megan's gaze hardened. "I'm not asking you to forgive her. I'm asking you to make sure she doesn't end up hurting herself." That hit harder than I expected. I ran a hand through my hair and exhaled sharply. "Where is she?" 20 minutes later, I was standing in front of Megan's apartment, staring at the chipped paint on the door. I knocked twice. No answer. Megan glanced at me nervously. "She's been home all day. Try again." I knocked harder this time. "Kayla." I called through the door. "Open up." A few moments passed before I heard shuffling from inside. The door cracked open just enough for Kayla to peek through. Her eyes were bloodshot, hair a tangled mess, and she looked like she hadn't slept in days. "What do you want, Mark?" she muttered, voice hoarse. I pushed the door open wider, stepping inside. Kayla stumbled back, glaring at Megan. "You called him." Megan shrugged. "You scared me." Kayla rolled her eyes and flopped onto the couch, grabbing a half-empty bottle of wine from the coffee table. I glanced around the apartment. Clothes were piled on the floor, dirty dishes stacked in the sink. The curtains were drawn tight, casting everything in a dim, depressing glow. Kayla caught me staring. "Go ahead. Judge me," she muttered, taking a long swig from the bottle. "I'm not here to judge you, Kayla," I replied, leaning against the wall. "I'm here because Megan thought you were going to do something stupid." She laughed bitterly. "Stupid? Please. I've already done plenty of stupid things." I crossed my arms. "Like calling me and leaving cryptic voicemails?" Her expression darkened. "I wasn't thinking," she admitted quietly. "I don't even remember leaving that message." Megan hovered near the door, clearly uncomfortable with the whole scene. "I'll give you 2 minutes," she said softly before stepping outside. Kayla sat in silence, tracing the rim of the wine bottle with her finger. "I didn't think it would end like this," she whispered after a long pause. I sighed, sitting down in the chair across from her. "You made your choices, Kayla." She looked at me then, really looked at me. And for the first time, I saw regret. Real, raw regret. "I thought Greg was the answer," she admitted, shaking her head. "I thought he was exciting. I don't know what I thought." I stayed quiet, letting her talk. "I lost everything. The job, the house, you." Her voice broke on the last word. I stared at her for a long moment. "You didn't lose me, Kayla," I said coldly. "You threw me away." Her shoulders sagged, and she wiped at her eyes with the sleeve of her sweater. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "Sorry doesn't fix this," I replied. "You hurt me. You hurt the kids. And now you're sitting here, drowning in regret like it's supposed to change things. It doesn't." Kayla said nothing, just quietly wept into her hands. After a few minutes, I stood up and walked to the door. "Get your life together, Kayla," I said softly. "But don't expect me to be part of it." I left her sitting there, alone with her mistakes. A week passed, and Kayla stayed silent. "No text. No voy temes." Megan didn't show up at my door again, and I figured whatever crisis Kayla had been teetering on must have passed. Good. I wasn't interested in fixing her. I focused on the kids, on work, on finally breathing without that lingering weight pressing down on me. Until the custody papers showed up. I found them in the mailbox, tucked neatly between junk flyers and bills. At first, I thought it was some mistake and notice for someone else. But no, Kayla's name was printed clear as day across the top. She was filing for joint custody. I stared at the envelope for a long time, sitting in the car with the engine still running. After everything, she had the nerve to try and crawl back into their lives. I wasn't mad. I was furious. That night, I sat in the living room with my lawyer, Vicky Sampson. She'd been with me through the divorce, the woman known for tearing apart cheaters in court like it was an art form. She flipped through the papers casually, one perfectly manicured eyebrow raising slightly. "She's got nerve," Vicky muttered, tapping the corner of the document against the table. "I'll give her that. What are the odds?" I asked, leaning forward. Vicky sighed. "Realistically, judges want both parents involved unless there's clear evidence she's unfit. The affair won't carry as much weight now. It's been too long." "She abandoned them," I snapped, barely keeping my voice under control. "She hasn't called, hasn't seen them in months. Now she wants to play mom again." Vicky's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, that dangerous smirk I knew so well flashed across her lips. "Then we remind the court why she lost custody in the first place." 2 days later, I met Kayla in a coffee shop. She asked to talk things over before the lawyers got involved. I only agreed because I wanted to see her squirm. When I walked in, she was already sitting by the window, fiddling with the sugar packets nervously. Her hair was straighter, neater than last time, like she was trying to pull herself together for this meeting. I didn't buy it. She smiled weakly when she saw me, gesturing to the chair across from her. I sat down, folding my arms. "So, what's this about?" Kayla tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, eyes darting around the cafe. "I know this is sudden," she started, "but I've been getting better. Therapy, new job, all of that. I want to be part of their lives again, Mark." "You still have to hear?" "No." Kayla blinked, thrown off. "What?" "You don't just get to decide to come back," I said coldly. "They're not dolls you can put on a shelf when things get hard and take down when you're lonely." "I made mistakes," she said, her voice trembling. "But I'm still their mother." "No, irrapli sharpli, lean incluse. You were their mother. Now, you're just someone who walked away." Kayla's lips quivered, but I didn't let her speak. "You think you can file some papers, show up with therapy bills, and everything magically resets?" I shook my head, biting back the rage burning in my chest. "They don't need you, Kayla. You taught them not to need you." Her hand trembled against the coffee cup, but she kept her voice steady. "I'm not trying to replace you, Mark. I just want time with them. You can't shut me out forever." I smiled bitterly. "Watch me." Kayla's eyes flashed with frustration, and for a brief moment, I saw the same arrogance that led her straight into Greg's arms. "You think you're the only one who can raise them?" she snapped. "You're not perfect, Mark. Don't pretend like you are." "I never pretended to be," I shot back. "But I didn't throw away our marriage for a 2-night stand with some loser, and I sure as hell didn't abandon our kids in the fallout." The silence that followed was deafening. Kayla's eyes flickered with something, guilt, maybe, or shame. I didn't care. I stood, tossing a few bills on the table. "See you in court, Kayla." The hearing was quick. Kayla's lawyer tried to paint her as reformed, claiming she was ready to take on the responsibility of joint custody. Vicky tore through her like a hurricane. We submitted evidence of her months of absence, her drinking, even that voicemail Megan showed me. The judge wasn't impressed. In the end, Kayla got supervised visitation, twice a month for 2 hours. No overnights, no holidays. When the verdict was read, she didn't look at me. I didn't expect her to. The first supervised visit was awkward. Kayla sat stiffly at the small table in the visitation center, trying to plaster on a smile as Julie and Ethan sat across from her. The room felt sterile, like a hospital waiting area. A woman from the court sat nearby, pretending to read a magazine, but keeping her eyes on them the entire time. Julie barely looked up from her sketchbook, absently doodling while Ethan fidgeted with the zipper on his jacket. Kayla leaned forward, her voice soft but uncertain. "I missed you guys. How's school?" Julie shrugged without looking up. Ethan mumbled something about soccer practice. Kayla's smile faltered. I watched from the observation window, arms crossed, letting the scene unfold. "Have you been doing anything fun?" Kayla pressed, desperation bleeding into her voice. Julie finally glanced up, her eyes cold. "We went to the lake last weekend. Dad took us." Kayla's gaze flicked to the window, her eyes meeting mine for half a second. She smiled faintly, as if trying to show she was fine. She wasn't. "That sounds great," she said quietly. Ethan, sweet as he was, finally tried to bridge the gap. "I scored a goal last week. Dad said we could celebrate with ice cream." Kayla's face softened. "That's awesome, buddy. I bet you're getting really good." Ethan nodded, but Julie wasn't having it. "You weren't there," Julie said, her tone sharp. Kayla's smile froze, and for a moment, she just stared at her daughter. "I know," Kayla whispered. "I'm sorry I wasn't." Julie's eyes narrowed, and she set down her pencil with deliberate care. "You didn't even call. You left, and now you want to come back like nothing happened." Ethan shifted uncomfortably, looking between them. Kayla swallowed hard. "It's not like that, honey. I made some bad choices." Julie's voice cut through the room like glass. "Yeah, we know." Kayla glanced toward me again, silently pleading for help, but I stayed put. This wasn't my mess to clean up. The rest of the visit dragged on, filled with forced small talk and uncomfortable silences. When the court monitor finally announced time was up, Kayla hugged Ethan tightly, but Julie pulled away before Kayla could even touch her. "Bye," Julie said flatly, grabbing her backpack and heading straight for the door. Ethan gave Kayla one last hug before following his sister. Kayla stood there, frozen, watching them leave like she was afraid she'd never see them again. I didn't say a word as I led the kids to the car. Later that evening, Julie sat on the couch, arms crossed, staring at the TV without really watching it. Ethan sat on the floor, quietly building something with his Legos. I sat beside Julie, setting down the remote. "She's trying, you know," I said softly. Julie didn't look at me. "She's only trying now because everything fell apart." I sighed, rubbing the back of my neck. "Maybe, but she's still your mom." Julie's jaw clenched. "Moms don't just leave." I didn't argue. She wasn't wrong. Kayla's second visit went just as poorly. By the third, Julie refused to go. Ethan went alone, sitting quietly as Kayla tried to coax more than one-word answers out of him. He hugged her when the visit ended, but I could tell he was starting to slip away too. Kayla noticed. I could see the panic settling into her bones every time she looked at them, like she knew she was losing more than just custody. She was losing them, and there wasn't a damn thing she could do to stop it. A few weeks later, Kayla stopped showing up. No calls. No texts. Her lawyer sent over a brief notice. Kayla was withdrawing from the visitation schedule to focus on personal matters. Translation: she gave up. Julie didn't say anything when I told her. She just nodded, like she'd been expecting it. Ethan asked if she was okay. I told him she was fine. I didn't know if that was true. I didn't really care. Months passed, and Kayla faded from our lives like a bad memory, slowly losing its grip. Julie stopped bringing her up altogether. Ethan asked less and less about her until, eventually, Kayla's name became something that hovered in the background, present but unspoken. It felt like healing. I poured my energy into the kids, into work, into life. I'd stopped waiting for the next problem, the next crisis Kayla would drop at my feet. But just when I thought she was gone for good, Kayla found a new way to crawl back. It started with a letter. I found it in the mailbox one afternoon, no return address, just my name scrawled across the front in handwriting I recognized immediately. I almost tossed it, but curiosity's a bitch. I tore it open, unfolding the single sheet of paper inside. "Mark, I know I've lost the right to ask for anything, but please hear me out. I'm leaving town. I got a job offer across the state, and I think it's for the best. I need a fresh start, and I know you and the kids deserve peace without me interfering. But I need to see them. One last time, not in a visitation center, not with the court monitor breathing down my neck. I need to say goodbye. I understand if you say no, but if there's anything left, any piece of you that still remembers what we used to have, please let me see them. Kayla." I stared at the letter for a long time, fingers tightening around the paper until it crumpled slightly at the edges. I should have said no. I wanted to say no, but something about the finality of it, her leaving for good, made me pause. The kids were at my parents' for the weekend. I drove out the next morning to pick them up, the letter still burning a hole in my jacket pocket. Julie sat in the passenger seat on the ride home, earbuds in, staring out the window. Ethan hummed softly to himself in the back, fiddling with his handheld game. Halfway down the road, I cleared my throat. "Your mom's leaving town," I said, keeping my eyes on the road. Julie didn't react. Ethan looked up, curious but not upset. "She wants to see you both before she goes," I continued, gripping the steering wheel a little tighter. "Just for a few hours. No court. No monitors." Julie pulled out one earbud and shot me a sidelong glance. "Why?" I sighed. "I guess she wants to say goodbye." Silence stretched between us. Finally, Julie shrugged. "I don't care. She's still your mom, Jules," I said softly. "No," she replied firmly. "She was. Now she's just some woman who left." Ethan spoke up from the back, his voice small. "I want to see her." Julie rolled her eyes, but said nothing. I glanced at Julie briefly. "It's up to you, Jules. I won't make you go." She looked out the window again, jaw tight. "Fine, I'll go, but only for Ethan." I didn't press the issue. Sunday afternoon, I brought them to the park, the spot Kayla requested in her letter. It was a small place on the edge of town, quiet and tucked away from the main roads. Kayla was already there when we arrived, sitting nervously on a bench beneath a large oak tree. She stood as soon as she saw the car, smoothing her hair and straightening her jacket. Julie walked ahead, keeping her distance. Ethan ran straight to Kayla, and she knelt down, wrapping him in a tight hug. She held him longer than she needed to, her eyes glassy when she finally pulled away. "Hey, buddy," she whispered. Julie hung back, arms crossed, watching the reunion like it didn't involve her. Kayla's eyes flickered to her, hopeful but hesitant. "Hi, Jules." Julie nodded slightly. "Hey." That was all she gave. Kayla didn't push. She sat down on the bench, letting Ethan climb up beside her, chatting softly with him while Julie sat near the edge of the grass, doodling in her sketchbook. I watched from a distance, close enough to intervene if needed, far enough to let them figure it out. Kayla tried. I could give her that much. She asked Ethan about school, laughed at his stories, and praised his soccer skills like she'd been there the whole time. Julie barely looked up. An hour passed before Kayla finally stood, brushing her hands against her jeans. "I should get going," she said, glancing toward me. I walked over as Ethan hugged her goodbye. Julie stayed rooted in place, sketchbook balanced on her knees. Kayla lingered, waiting. "Julie," she said softly, "I'm sorry. For everything. I know you probably don't care, but I just needed to say it." Julie's pencil stopped moving. "I hope one day you'll forgive me." Julie finally looked up, her gaze steady and unreadable. "I'll think about it," she said simply. Kayla nodded, swallowing hard. She stepped back, shooting me a quick glance. "Thank you, Mark." I nodded. "Take care of yourself, Kayla." And just like that, she left. Ethan waved until her car disappeared. Julie never looked back. Weeks passed, and Kayla's departure barely left a ripple in our lives. Ethan asked about her once or twice, wondering where she'd gone, but Julie never mentioned her again. It was like she'd erased Kayla from her mind, moving forward with the quiet, stubborn resilience she inherited from me. I admired that about her. It wasn't until one Saturday afternoon, while we were cleaning out the garage, that Julie surprised me. She sat on an old crate, sorting through boxes of toys and clothes the kids had long outgrown, when she held up a dusty photo frame. It was from before, back when Kayla and I were still Mark and Kayla, instead of two separate people divided by betrayal. Julie stared at the picture for a long time, her finger tracing the edges of the frame. "What do you want to do with this?" she asked softly, lifting it for me to see. It was a family photo, one of those cheesy studio sessions Kayla had insisted on when Ethan was just a baby. Kayla smiled brightly in the center, holding Ethan in her arms, while I stood behind her with my hand resting on Julie's shoulder. We looked happy, but I remembered that day. How Kayla had snapped at me in the car for forgetting Ethan's extra bottle. How she'd spent half the shoot scrolling through her phone, more interested in whatever drama was playing out in her messages than the family standing in front of her. "Trash it," I said without hesitation, reaching for another box. Julie didn't move. You sure? I glanced at her, frowning slightly. Why? You want to keep it? Julie shrugged, setting the frame down beside her. I don't know. Feels weird throwing it away. I sighed, wiping dust off my hands. Look, Jules, I get it. It's not easy to forget everything. But sometimes, holding on just drags you down. She nodded slowly, but her eyes stayed on the photo. I guess, she muttered. I just wish she hadn't been such a mess. I couldn't help but laugh quietly. Yeah, me too. Julie smiled faintly, brushing her hair behind her ear. But I'm glad she's gone, she added after a beat. I paused, leaning against the workbench. You don't hate her, do you? Julie thought for a moment, twirling the photo in her hands. No, I just don't care anymore. There was no anger in her voice. No bitterness. Just truth. I nodded, proud of her in a way I couldn't quite put into words. Let me see that, I said, holding out my hand. Julie passed me the frame, and I looked at it for a few seconds before quietly setting it in the donation pile. She didn't argue, and neither of us looked back at it. The next morning, while making breakfast, I heard Julie talking softly to Ethan in the living room. Mom's not coming back, she told him, her voice calm and matter-of-fact. I peeked around the corner, listening as Ethan sat cross-legged on the floor, sorting through his Legos. I know, Ethan mumbled. It's okay. We still have Dad. Julie ruffled his hair, grinning. Yeah, he's not that bad, I guess. I smiled to myself and went back to flipping pancakes. They were right. They still had me, and that was more than enough. Thank you for listening this story to the end. Subscribe to our channel for more captivating stories.